Hi, everybody. My name is Haley Milliman. I am the head of education here at Pro Writing Aid, and we are so thrilled to be back with you today for another session in our Fantasy Writers Week Summit. My guest is Angela Ford. Angela J. Ford is a best-selling author who writes epic fantasy and steamy fantasy romance with vivid worlds, morally gray characters, and endings you just can't guess. She's published 14 novels, 6 short stories, and sold over 32,000 copies. She's also a co founder of Book Sniffer, which is the new app for book lovers, plus an effective way for authors to market their books to new readers. Angela enjoys traveling, hiking, and playing World of Warcraft with her husband. And first and foremost, she is a reader and can be found with her nose in a book. Angela, we're so excited to have you here today. Welcome. It's great to have you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and excited for this session.
Yeah, I will turn it over to you.
All right, great. All right, so for today, I'm really excited to be chatting about how to organize your story ideals and write a fantasy novel. And so, without further ado, let's dive in. So, I started writing fantasy when I was 15 years old or actually 12 years old. And I just fell in love with the world and how vast it is and how anything is absolutely possible. And so I'm really excited to talk today about ideals. And what you'll learn today is how to take your ideals and turn them into a story that readers adore. And we'll also dive into how to organize your ideals because this was one of the pitfalls that I fell into organization. Everything was everywhere, and I just could not remember where I'd written down things or how to structure things or pull them all together. So now I have a method to the madness. And so I'll share some tips on that. Then we'll also go over how to expand your imagination to create an exciting but believable fantasy world. And then we'll also talk about characters. And so, first of all, I want to start out with getting organized. So, this is a big thing. When I first started writing, like I said, I was 12. And so, I really didn't have a good method for it. And this was back before really computers, personal computers were a big thing. And so, I did a lot of handwriting. And so, one method that I found that I really enjoy for getting down my ideals and just kind of teasing them out is to sit down and actually write things out by hand in a journal. And so now I actually have a stack of books where I just kind of sit and I journal and I kind of put down all of my ideals. And so if you are into handwriting, that's a good way to do it. I also like writing down things by hand just because um, this is actually a research study has shown that when we write down things, we're more likely to remember them better. And I found that that is very true for myself. And I think that is because when I'm typing, I type very fast. And so I don't really have time for my ideals um, to really think through all of my ideals. And so writing them down allows me to slow down. It slows down my process, slows down my brain, and really allows me to think and tease it out. And so that might be an option for you. Google Sheets is something else that I do use. And this is more on when I'm actually writing a story. I will admit that I am much more of a pantser than a plotter. And so when I'm writing a story and I have a new character that I'm introducing, or a new creature, or something that's related to world building, what I do is I go into Google Sheets and I put it in there along with the description. And so this allows me to reference it later on during the writing process. And so that way, I don't forget what I said about this character and what they look like. I already have that written down. Or I don't forget this is how the magic system works. And so they're not those inconsistencies when I'm like, oh, and now the magic system does this. And readers are like, huh, you didn't say that the first time. A couple of other things that I'd recommend using, you can use a Word document just to pull all your ideals together. I also use notes on my iPhone, just jotting those down. That's really helpful when I'm up and about. I also have a Mac. And so my notes, if they're on my phone, they sync over to my Mac. And so it's just easy to pull that up and copy that into Google Sheets. wherever I'm going. And then I also recommend using Scrivener. It's what I use for writing, and it is my favorite writing tool. And so you can actually just put everything in there. You can import things and just really have a place where everything for your world is completely organized. And so I recommend before you get started, make sure you have a plan for that, an organizational plan, so that you don't end up with everything everywhere and have some madness to clean up. And so when we're talking about ideals, I like to separate them out into three different categories. And I don't think it really matters which category you dig into first, but this is just the way that I like to do it. And I think, you can decide which ideal you have first and kind of dig into that category first. But this is the order we'll be chatting through things today. So, first of all, I like to think about characters. And I try to write most of my books from a very character driven point of view. And so I like to sit back and think, who are my characters and what are they like? And for the most part, most of my ideals start with a character in a situation. And then after that, I like to think through plot. What is the overarching plot of the story? Is it going to be one book or is it several books? Is the plot going to be complete when we hit the last book? Or are there several little mini plots that build upon each other to build this whole fantasy series? So that's really important to think about. I know it can be intimidating to think about things at such a large scale, and so when I'm thinking from a plot point of view, I kind of just tend to write down, okay, this is what's happening in book one, just one sentence. And this is what's happening in book two. And this is what's happening in book three. Or I write down what I can do to make sure they're building upon each other so I can write something that's exciting and goes together. And then finally, I like to go back and look at the world and really kind of dig into that a lot more. I want to know what creatures live in this world. Is there magic? What is that magic system like? And most of all, the most important question is, what is wrong that needs to be fixed? And this could be something that's wrong with the world. This could be wrong with the people that's living in the world. But just remember, when you're writing a fantasy story, something is going wrong that has to be fixed. And that really is the basis for every single story. If you go back to the classics, you're thinking about, oh, like Lord of the Rings, like there's something going on, like there's this darkness that's taken over the world. And so something has to be done about that. And so that's how I like to divide up the ideal process into categories. And so we're going to dig into characters first, just because characters is such a large part. And I want to make sure we really dig into this and cover this today. And so for characters, usually my ideal usually starts with a main character. And so I remember when I first started writing, I had this dream about a warrior and he was standing on the edge of a battlefield. And I kept coming back to that moment because I was like, there's a story there. And there's a story that I want to explore. Why is he standing here? Why does he feel this relief? And what's going on, what happened to make him arrive at this conclusion? And as it turns out, that ended up being the final scene in the book, but it was the first thing that came to mind. And so when you're having these ideals, it might be the beginning of the book, the end of the book, or the middle of the book. And it might be the main character that you're starting out with. And once you have that first ideal and that first main character in mind, what I encourage you to do is kind of explore a couple of other things. So a couple of things I like to think about is, I have my main characters. Who are the side characters in this story? Are there going to be someone who's more like a mentor? Is there going to be sidekick? Is there going to be a love interest? And then how many points of view am I going to be writing in this story? My very first novel has 5 points of view, so 5 main characters. But even with those 5 characters, there's one that is really the main character throughout the entire story. And the rest, while you get to learn their stories and their background and their history, is really that first person, the warrior standing on the edge of the battlefield, that became that main character throughout the tale. All right, so speaking of characters, let's dig into some more examples. So This is kind of where your ideals start. And I think it's helpful to just kind of jot these down wherever you've decided that you're organizing all of your ideals and just put it together and kind of think through it a little bit more. So for my character, I had that warrior standing on the edge of a battlefield. Turns out that he's a healer. And so he's relieved, but he's also sorry about the things that happened. For another book, I had, well, actually, this is for the same book. I had the ideal of a farmer, a very reluctant farmer, he was fishing, minding his own business, and he accidentally walks through a portal and he doesn't reach a new world. He ends up on the other side of the world and he just wants to go home. And so his journey is trying to find a way to get back home and get back to his life that he accidentally left. Another ideal I had was for a girl that was just searching for the cure to heal her sister because her sister has these visions. She has a lot of problems, and so she really wants to find that so that her sister will be well. And then another one, a warrior who's bound by a magical collar, who's forced to go on a dangerous quest. And so these are the examples. And as we continue this presentation, we're kind of go through and I'll show you how characters plus plot plus world all comes together. And so these are all of the ideals. And so after you have your character, you're going to want to expand on that. And so we'll chat a little bit about getting to know your characters. I like to sit with my characters for a little bit and kind of think, what is their problem? Because there has to be a problem in order for there to be a story. Readers want to read something about a story where something is happening. If a character is just going about their normal daily lives, not really all that exciting, depending on what they do for a living. And so when I'm thinking about their problem, I like to think whether it is something that is internal or external. Is it something that's wrong with them, that there's a weakness or their situation, or is there something happening that's much larger, that's out of their control? And then after I kind of think through those things and kind of arrive at something that I like, I also want to think about the character's personality and what they are like. And so putting together just a personality for your character is helpful to base it on whether they're someone who's kind-hearted, whether they're very driven or motivated. They could be impulsive, they could be shy and timid, but putting together some character traits for your characters is helpful because it makes them more relatable and helps them to be something that people want to relate to them. And one other question I like to ask myself is, if I were friends with this character, why would I want to be friends with them? And so that's something to keep in mind. And then there are other things. Now we're talking about writing fantasy. And so this is where the sky is the limit. There really are no boxes. And so your character might have special abilities, or they might have limitations, or, they might have something that keeps them from moving forward, or, a certain way of thinking. They might not have all of their limbs. So just thinking about what special abilities they have and then what limitations they have. And then one thing that I think that helps to make a character even more relatable is determining how their personality influences their decisions. And so if they are shy and timid and like to shy away from that confrontation, how does that affect them? How does that keep them from achieving what they want throughout the story? And that can be a powerful way of making your characters relatable and helping your readers to sympathize with them. And so, a couple notes here. If you are a plotter, my recommendation for you when it comes to characters is really to dig deeper into your character motivation. I think you'll want to definitely go beyond the couple of things that I have listed out for you and really dig into more about who the character is, their occupation, their relationships. You can really kind of dig deep and set together a really, really nice profile for your character. If you're more like me and you're a pantser, I think what would be really helpful is to discover more about your character by putting them into a situation and writing about them. This is really how I find out their strengths and weaknesses. A lot of the times, I like to go ahead and start writing just because my characters tend to run away with the story. They kind of do whatever they want to do. And so it's exciting to kind of just give them free reign and just let them go and find out what's going on with them. And this is one of the things that makes writing fantasy so much fun to me is the characters and seeing what they do when I put them into situations where they're confronted, where they have problems, where they're forced to really make decisions and move forward. And so let's take a look at a character snapshot. And so when I first thought of my character, he was a warrior standing on the edge of a battlefield. And so now, after taking a deeper look, I know that his name is Margulis. He's a talented healer. That's his special ability. He's a rather unremarkable warrior. He's not really good. But he has a very strong desire to help others. He's kind-hearted, and so that's helpful. Looking at his background, I now know that when he was young, his home was taken over by magical creatures, and then his older brother just disappeared. And he really wants to find out what happened to his brother. Then one of his motives, he really wants to prevent others from experiencing his pain. And because of this tragic thing that happened in his background, this could have changed him and made him either have a negative character arc or a positive character arc. But he is the kind of person, he's very kind hearted. And so instead of being angry and upset, although he was angry and upset, at the end of the day, he wants to help others and he wants to prevent them from experiencing what he experienced. And so this is the catalyst for the story. When monsters start invading the land, he joins forces with a group of warriors and they set off to find the source of evil. But since he's really eager to help others, in his zeal to be helpful, he ends up getting captured and thrown in prison. And that is where the story opens. And so that's just a snapshot of what you can do with taking your characters, kind of sitting back with them, getting to know them. And if you're ever stuck when you're sitting there with your characters in your story, I recommend asking yourself a couple of questions. One would be, why is this character like this? What is their motive? And then also ask yourself the other question, what if this happened to them? Or what if I put them in this situation? And so asking why and asking what if will help you move forward with your ideals and really expand them and make them bigger. All right, so next we're going to dive into plot a little bit. And so, plot is what is going to happen in your story. And this is the whole structure for it. And I think it's helpful with your plot if you take some time to really sit down and figure out which story structure you're going to follow. And I'm more of a reader. I like to learn things from reading books, but once I sat down and started reading more books on story structure, it was just very eye-opening to see what is helpful for really putting my story together and to avoid getting stuck. And this is really big, especially if you are a pantser and you're just going to sit down with your first ideal and start writing. You'll probably get to a point where you're like, huh, and now what should happen? But if you're following the guidelines of story structure, then you'll have a better idea of what needs to happen next. Once I started following story structure more closely, it really eliminated a lot of the problems I had when it came to writing a story, getting stuck, and getting that all terrible writer's block. And so there are different ways that you can dig into story structure. I know the three act structure is very popular. You can also follow the hero's journey, which is something that I tend to follow more of the hero's journey for my epic fantasy just because it's so much longer and I need those different breaks. There's also the save the cat method, which is similar to three act structure, but it just digs a little bit deeper into helping you understand what needs to happen at each section of the story. But basically, each scene you write should build upon each one and take your character through a journey. All right, so let's take a look at some plot examples. So going back to the warrior on the battlefield, I kind of like to sit back and because I am a pantser, just take a high level view of the story and what I'm going to write. And so, as an example, for my very first novel, The Five Warriors, just like a quick overview of what's going to happen in the book is five warriors with unique abilities and magical weapons. disobey their commander, and they sneak off to stop a powerful immortal from destroying their world. And so that's quick and snappy. It tells me what's going to happen. And so now I have five different characters to dig into and help move them along that journey. Another one for another book that I wrote was about twin sisters. They embark on this quest to find a cure, and they end up caught in this civil war between purebloods and blended ones. And one of the reason I like this story is because it follows more of a character development overview instead of the plot. And so these characters, they're innocent, they're on their way to achieve their goal, and they end up getting caught up in something that's so much bigger than them. And then another one, a warrior bound by a magical collar is forced to go on a quest to find an ancient relic. That relic turns out can break all curses. It calls forth the demons from the underworld. And so this is they're in a bad business. And so let's take a look at how we can add the plot and the characters together. And so we have the healer, and he is one of the five warriors that's on this quest to stop the destruction of their world. And so putting that all together, now you have your characters and you know their plot line and what they're going to do. The girl searching for a cure is caught in the war, and then the warrior bound by a magical collar is forced to go on this hunt for an ancient relic. And that's great and all, but what about plot twist? What about making it even more exciting? Now that you have your plot, I like to go back and think, what's the worst that can happen? How can I up the stakes? How can I make this turn this story on its head and create something that readers aren't really expecting? And so thinking about what's the worst that can happen and kind of brainstorming those scenarios, you can write them out, you can just kind of think through them. But I think this will help with taking your story to the next level. And so we'll definitely take a look at some examples for that. But, think about the worst thing that can happen from a plot perspective, and then drill down to your characters to determine, every character should have a goal. What lesson do they need to learn? And what events need to take place to move the character to help them make that shift and that change, to help them move out of their shell and really take action. And so let's go over some plot twist examples using what we already know. Okay, so for the five warriors, we know they're on their way to stop this devastation, but it turns out one of their group actually knows the villain, and he could have put a stop to this long ago. And so when the group finds this out, this is a massive revelation for them. It's also very frustrating. Turns out the sisters that are off on their quest to find this cure, they get caught in a war. It turns out this cure will actually end the war, so that's helpful. And then for the warrior that's bound by a magical collar, in order to gain her freedom, she actually has to use the ancient relic, even though it's going to unleash all of this madness on the world. And so now we're at a level where we really need to determine, wow, now we have something exciting. Now we have something to work with. So once you have all of that together, or depending on where you want to start, characters, plot, then you do get to take the extra step of going into creating a believable fantasy world. And so we're going to touch on a little bit of this, but I'm not going to go too deep into world building since that's a whole another workshop in and of itself. But I like to think about what the world is like. And so when I'm writing, and I think this is very important for really bringing your readers in and allowing them to see from the character's point of view, is I highly recommend using the five senses. And so you can even go to each chapter and have a color that really stands out, or a sound that the characters keep hearing. The sites, and I love this. For visuals, I like to go to Pinterest and kind of search for different fantasy, landscape fantasy photos to really get an ideal of what my characters are seeing, and then I write that out. And then a couple of other things that are also equally as important, what does the air smell like? Or if they go into a village, what does that smell like? Or they're eating a meal. And one of the things I really like, I used to enjoy reading the Redwall books just because the author did an excellent job of describing the food in those books. And like I'd read it and I'd just be so hungry, my mouth would be watering just because he did such a great job with those visuals. And so, if you make a point of using the five senses and really incorporating that into your story, readers will just, oh, they'll love it. All right. And so, other things to consider in your world is whether there are mythical creatures, what your magic system is going to be like, and then also what languages people speak, the political system, and then what are the people or the races or the species in your world? What are they all like? And so, for brainstorming your world and kind of really digging into it, a few things I recommend doing are, reading. Reading fantasy is great. That's helpful. Seeing what others are doing, that always helps to get my wheels turning and helps me to get more ideas about what I want to do. And I know that sometimes it can seem like, oh, I'm worried about copying someone else, but you can be more intentional about it, like knowing if someone has done something you think that's fantastic. Go, I'm going to put my unique spin on it. And one of the ways I got started writing was just because I took a look at books that I was reading and I was like, I really like what they did there. But if I were writing it, I would do this. And so you can take an ideal and you can really make it unique and make it your own. And then other things, reading history, doing research, studying mythology, those are all different things you can do to really kind of expand and get new ideals for building out your fantasy world. So let's take a look at some examples and what those look like. And so for for building my fantasy world out, I've always been excited about fae and fairies, and different immortal creatures. And so, like I said, I started when I was 12, but when I was about 15, I pulled out this notebook and I just like wrote out all of these different immortal creatures, what they were like. I think I did like 10 different species. It was pretty crazy. And I got really detailed. I got into what they look like, their occupations, just, where they live, how they act, just super detailed. It was really fun though. But I spent like a summer just like going through and deciding what my creatures would be like. Another world building thing that I really enjoy doing is that I love the ideal of mermaids, but they're in the sea. And I wanted to do something with creatures that lived in the sky. And so I created this elaborate kingdom in the clouds where the sky people dwell and they ride these winged horses and there's a rainbow bridge, just a bunch of fun stuff because like I said, it's fantasy and so the sky's the limit. And you can do anything that you want to do with it. And then I also did a really gnarly forbidden forest where people go into that forest and they disappear. You never hear from them again. The question is why? And then a couple other things, talking animals, of course, that's something that it's just fun to have those in there. Magical weapons are a big thing. I love the Story King author, but I wanted to take the ideal of magical weapons a little bit further, and so that was something that I really enjoyed doing in stories. And then different magical abilities, for example, mind control. Those are always fun to go. But so digging into your world and really expanding it just can add that unique element to your story. And so let's take a look at bringing it all together. We got our world, we have our plot, we have our ideals for our characters, and what does that look like when we bring it all together? Well, like we mentioned earlier, we have our healer, and he's on this amazing quest. There might be a traitor in their midst. Turns out that he has this ability to control magical creatures, the very same magical creatures that destroyed his homeland. So that's hella handy for him. And then also, he has a unique weapon. I know I mentioned earlier that it turns out he's not a good warrior. He ends up with a weapon that is a bow and arrow he can't miss. So that ended up being useful for him on his journey. For the sisters looking for a cure and being caught in this whole civil war, it turns out they enter the Forbidden Forest because it has what they need to find, and they also discover some mythical creatures. And so that's one way where the world building got very exciting. As a matter of fact, my favorite part of writing that entire book was just the part in the Forbidden Forest because I was like, "Oh, there are just so many different creatures I can pull out and different events I can make happen to them because they're in this scary place." And then dragons. I mean, they're just a staple in fantasy. And so for the warrior bound by a magical caller who's forced to hunt for this ancient relic, I had her go to the ancient kingdom of dragons, and that was a fun thing to do. And so that's how it all comes together. And so as a recap, when you're sitting down to kind of brainstorm and put your ideas together, first of all, decide how to organize your notes and choose a category to start with. And like I said, I like to start with characters because I want my stories to be very character driven. You absolutely can start anywhere you want to start. If plot comes to you first, start with that. If you have an ideal for creatures in the world, start with that, but just make sure you write it down and have it in a way where it's organized. And then, if you are a pantser, in order to further expand your ideals, I recommend diving in, writing, discovering the world as you write, figuring out what your characters want as you go, and really take that time to plot as you write. And if you're a plotter, I would recommend stepping back and taking the time to do that research, create your skeleton outline, and write out an initial concept of each category before you even begin writing. And then a couple things to remember, however you structure your time, make sure that you enjoy the process of it because writing is fun and it's that process that's a lot of fun. And I would recommend, regardless of whether you're a pantser or a plotter, just write consistently. Make sure you schedule that time and set aside time to write, and don't edit yourself as you're writing because this is your first draft. This is where you're going to get all your ideals out, and then the other drafts, that's where you can revise and go, okay, now I understand my character. I know the world. I understand the magic system. I've got my plot twist in here and I know what's going to happen. So now I can clean up this manuscript and make sure it has that consistency throughout. And so that is it for writing and making sure you get your ideals together.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think that last point was so great. I really like the idea of thinking of the first draft as a time where you can get to know your characters and kind of the main plot. And then later you can come back and really add layers. I think that's a really wonderful way of thinking about it, where, it's not just setting that expectation that the first draft is not going to be perfect. It's going to be, you're not going to have a finished book after that. But that it is a great time to just like get to know everybody, which is really, I really love that. So we've got lots of questions. So I will just go ahead and dive into a few of them.
All right.
So Thomas asks, how do you address ideas that come up with, sorry, excuse me. How do you address ideas that you come up with regarding geography in your story? Do you keep a map that you frequently update or plot?
Oh, that's a great question. I did not touch on that. But like I said, I like to handwrite and journal. And so oftentimes, if geography comes up, I like to go ahead and scribble down my map. It's usually messy and ugly and it's just for me. But I'd highly recommend that if you're a more visual person and you need to know, okay, the mountains are here and this is the path that goes down and here's where the dragons are and the eels and the sea. Then yes, I would absolutely recommend that. And if you do need a site to go to where you rather build out your map, I recommend Inkarnate. Starts, yeah, Inkarnate is really good for map making, and you can just create something. And I usually do that too, if I want to print it out and kind of look at it.
Amazing. Yeah. Someone else had a question about, do you have any other tools that you use for world building? We just had a session with World Anvil, which is great. But yeah, are there any other things that you like to use as part of your fantasy writing process?
Aside from like visuals and Pinterest and reading, not really. That would be it. But I've also found that like I'm more of a discovery writer. I will discover things as I write. So I think using writing prompts that's also been very helpful for me too. Just because you can take that time to really figure things out as you're writing.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I think sometimes as writers we have this idea that like we have to have all the ideas and it always has to come to us really easily, and it's like sometimes that doesn't happen, and sometimes using a story structure like Save the Cat or like the hero's journey or even just writing prompts will help kind of shake things loose and get you to the next place.
Yes.
Um Okay, so a couple other questions. Let's see. So Deborah asks, how important is it to have a likable main character?
Oh, I think that's very important. I've had people that have been like, I started reading this book and then I hated the main character. She was just not likable. And so the save the cat method, it's called save the cat, just because in order to make your character likable, even if they don't have a likable personality, there are different things that you can do to show that they are human, they do have a heart, if they're in the right situation, they can do something. And so usually that's just called save the cat. Do something that shows that they are a likable person, even if they might be an anti hero or an assassin. My warrior that was bound by magical collar. The reason that happened to her is because she was not a likable person. She's an anti hero. She's off, just doing her own thing and just a nasty person to get on the wrong side of. And so I had to put her in a position where you end up rooting for her. And so that's what I would do. Even if you're writing a character that people aren't going to like, make sure you show them doing something that is likable.
Yeah, that's such a great point. If you can add that kind of humanity or the reasoning behind what they're doing, or even just like you said, putting them in a situation where you feel bad for them, where you root for them, that can go so far, even if they're an anti hero. Um, Daryl asks, if envisioning several books, how far into the series should the plot arc be planned?
This is a good one. I like to go ahead and make sure I know the plot arc for the entire series, but I also know that that can change. And so, like I said earlier, I just tend to write out a one line or a couple of sentences of what's going to happen in each book. And so that way I know that in advance. And now all the nuances and the details. That can be something that takes a lot more to plan out. And so if you are a heavy plotter, I would recommend, going a little bit further with maybe mapping out this is what happens in Act One, Act Two, and Act Three. So you have an idea of your climax and the way I guess the final showdown between the heroes and the villains is going to play out. But usually, aside from the skeleton outline, I don't go too deep into it.
Yeah, I think it's really I think the happy medium between plotting and pantsing is truly a medium, because plotting can really help, if you're running into writer's block or anything like that. It helps you have that structure. But then if you decide to change something, you have to change everything. There's kind of like that sequence that goes down later, where there's a lot of kind of repercussions for having to change things. So I like the way that I like to work, because I am a plotter, is having kind of I like to do bookends, so like where it starts and where it stops. And then if I'm thinking about series or anything like that, I'll think kind of the bookend of the start and the stop, and then know that like if I do a more detailed outline for a specific book, then again there might be changes that are kind of coming in that stage. So yeah, it's just having there's so many different kind of flexible types of outlines as well that can really help, even just get some ideas, and spur some things if you're getting stuck. And I saw a couple of people in the chat also mentioning mind mapping, which is another, which you were talking about, using Pinterest, which can be really similar. Just like doing some visual searching can be really helpful for people as well,
Yes.
if you get stuck. Um, okay, so let's see, lots of questions. A couple about plot twists. So somebody says, do you introduce plot twist ideas before you start writing or during the process? And I know you talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm a discovery writer. And so usually my plot twist ideals happen once I get done writing the first act, and then I'll get more ideals as the story progresses. So yeah, usually in the middle of it. Like there was one book I wrote last year. I was writing it and I was like, this book is okay. And then every time I would get about 10 chapters into whatever I was doing, I would get an idea for a plot twist. And I would go back and fix it all up and get it to that plot twist and keep on going. And then I get another one. And so it just kind of flowed as I was writing, the ideals continued.
Amazing. So somebody had a question about backstory. So what are some other ways to share backstory besides just flashbacks? Is the question.
Um, I I think it would be helpful if you're writing maybe in the first chapter or so, but having your characters, showing your characters in their what's called the normal world, where they live right now, what they're doing, their everyday life. Maybe there's an event that happened in their past that was kind of tragic, and so having a conversation between characters or someone bring it up can be another way to show like this tragic thing happened, or maybe they don't, they're moving towards an event that might happen, and 2 years ago something really bad happened to during that event, and so they're talking about that. And so yeah, I would definitely say conversation, or maybe just showing that character in their normal world can help you with bringing that backstory full circle.
Yeah, totally. I think that's if you use the hero's journey method for plotting, the like first step of the hero's journey is like the hero in the ordinary. So the hero in whatever that ordinary is. There's a lot of if you like Star Wars, especially the first movie, kind of follows like the hero's journey almost exactly. So if you're familiar with Star Wars, like Luke on Tatooine is kind of the ordinary, just like staring off at the sunset, dreaming of adventure. And so yes, so showing that hero or your main character in the ordinary in that first place. I love the idea of just having this kind of event that they, something that they're anticipating or something like that. Um and then dialogue, yeah, dialogue is such a great and kind of natural way to show, to talk about things that are important to characters, because I think if there's any backstory that's worth including, it's going to have a, if it's going to have an impact on your plot, then it's important to kind of talk about that, and they'll be talking about it in dialogue at a certain point. Okay, so someone says, as a pantser, how deep into organizing your plot do you get before you start creating scenarios to see how your characters react?
Wow, it honestly, it depends on the book. There's one book where I just did nothing but write, and I didn't even like think about my character too much. I was like, "Oh, she's a warrior princess. Let's go." And, nothing. I didn't even dig deep into that at all. But there's one series that I'm working on right now where I really wanted to dig into my characters and get to know them. And so I went a little bit beyond what I normally do. I not only put together the character profile, I thought about their character traits, and then I thought about just really starting out what scenario I saw them in. And then I wanted to focus on the character wound, or, the lack. What do they need? What do they think they want? And how do I take them from that situation that they're in and really bring them on a journey that helps them to, it opens their eyes about the world, helps them to get to what they actually want. And so I want to say I did like 2 to 3 scenes, or if you're following story structure, I did all of act 1 for those characters. And I mean like really simple outline where I was just saying, okay, in this scene this happens, and it's one sentence about each scene. But it was helpful to me to really dig into those characters because, this project I'm working on is a little bit bigger. I'm doing multiple points of view. And so I wanted to have a better handle on it before I just jumped right in.
Amazing. So someone, I know you said you were really into fae and fairies, especially as a kid. So someone asks, do you have any books or sources of inspiration for creating cultures or fantasy cultures and that type of thing? And they say amazing presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. I don't really have like I'm not a big researcher. I like reading fairy tales. I like reading mythology. I enjoy history now and then, but really it's more I do a lot more reading. I have been very I would say I have spent a lot of time studying more of the Irish culture, just because they do have a lot of fairy tales, tales about fairies and leprechauns. And so that was helpful to me in developing the worlds. But really, everything that I've done is based on some sort of mythology, I would say, or the ideal came from mythology. And so I would just recommend looking at I guess, yeah, just different mythologies and looking at those, reading those stories to help you get ideals for your world.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I do. I like reading Greek and Chinese mythology a lot to try to figure out story inspiration. Okay, I feel like Greek mythology was like the first fantasy I really knew about as a kid because it was
Yes.
like I had a book of Greek mythology and those stories are so great. And then I think that spurred a big love for fantasy for me. Um, okay, so Faith asks, and this is a little bit more about publishing. Faith asks, do you think it's best to start by writing and trying to get your series published, or to start with a standalone in order to build a relationship with your publisher or audience?
Oh, this is more of a traditional publishing question, and I would think that if you're trying to go with towards the traditional publishing route, I would recommend the standalone, or at least the first book in the series, because I think what publishers want to see is the fact that you can sell books, you have an audience, you have people that want what you can create, and when I'm rethinking it, maybe the series would be better because, they'll just buy out your rights. And if they know people already love the series, then I would just they'll know that, the next books hopefully will be successful because people want to continue on this journey that you brought them on.
Yeah, and it's so hard. I think with traditional publishing, like every journey is a little bit different, and everybody there's just so many things that go into it as well. So it can be challenging. Do you have any thoughts on that from like a self-publishing perspective? Starting out with one versus a series or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say if you're self-publishing, always go for the series. Do the series every single time. And if you are doing standalones, link them together in the same world. Right now, having multiple series in one universe is a really popular option right now. Just because when they find your work and they discover it and they fall in love with it, if they can enter your universe from multiple points of if there are multiple points of entry to your universe, then you have multiple ways of pulling them in and keeping them coming back. So I highly recommend going this series route.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Even like traditionally published authors, so many are doing like this thing in this world, and and it's just like constantly kind of coming back to the world, which feels like coming home, which is so nice.
Yes, exactly.
It's great. Okay, so Ian asks if you write in different genres within fantasy, should you use a pen name for different books, or would it be a better idea to have like a website kind of dedicated to each fantasy world?
So I actually do this. I write different genres within fantasy. So I have more of my epic fantasy and then I have my steamy fantasy romance. And so I do it all under the same name just because and I surveyed my audience on this. And so you might find it might be a little bit different for you, but people told me that for the most part they really liked my writing style. And so it really didn't matter what I was writing, they would read it. And that was helpful to me because and I'm pretty straightforward. I tell people this is a fantasy romance. If it's not your thing, you don't have to read it. But, it's very clear to see on my website, it's clear to see on my email list, and so that they already know what they're getting into. And I don't recommend having different sites unless you are doing a pen name. What I've done is on my website there is a page called Where to Start. And if you go to that page, you'll see all of my series and I'll tell you exactly what to expect in each book. So I'll say this is classic epic fantasy, That's great. This one is more of a fantasy adventure. If you like dragons or you like wizards, then read this series. And then I have a section for my fantasy romance. And so I tell people, these are fantasy romance shorts. This is a novel. If you like steamy fantasy romance, read this. If you don't, don't bother. So it's just very clear and upfront with what they're getting. And so it helps keeps their expectations in line.
Yeah, I think Brandon Sanderson does that as well. He says, start here with this, start here with that. I feel like it's a good problem to have when you're like, I just have so many different books in different genres that I've got a whole menu for you of anything you can have, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this question because selfishly I struggle with this. So Chad says, how do you come up with names for your main character? I struggle with it. Do you start with one name and do you change it halfway through?
Yes, I do. Um, for my characters, it's really funny because I want my characters' names to have meanings, and so I go to a lot of like websites where where you can get the meanings for different names, or you can look at okay, these are the names that were popular in like Norse mythology or Celtic mythology. So I really like using those websites. You can do fantasy name generators to get ideals, and then from there you can kind of convert them into your own. So that's a hard thing to do, but sometimes if I don't know the name of a person, like I'm writing this story and there's an ice lord in it, I just have his name as Ice Lord until I can figure out his name. I put it in all caps and then I can do a find and replace once I figure out what his name is. But I've also found that part of the discovery process that I like is writing a little bit, and eventually the character's name will reveal itself just because if their personality is a certain way and the way they act is a certain way and the things they're doing, I'm like, ooh, this would be a good name for them now that I've gotten to know them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like I use that as an excuse to not start. I'll be like, oh, I just got to find the right name, and it's like, no, just find and replace. Just start it.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'll
Call
be
them
sitting here
main
forever.
character.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be sitting here forever. Okay, so we have time for one more question. Ryan says, how do you increase the stakes with each consecutive book in a series?
Oh, that's a hard one. So there's actually only been one series that I've written that has the same characters throughout. Well, I mean, yeah, I'll take that back. So one series that I did, I decided in order to up the stakes, I decided not to write a complete story in book one, but to make it arc over the entire series. And so it's a trilogy. And what I did was I just did a quick brainstorm of what I wanted to happen in book one to get to the point where people wanted to read book two. And so this one was about the warrior with the ancient relic. And so, um, in order to up the stakes, I just had things get more intense, I guess, and scarier, and the likelihood of success just decreased as the character went on. As they moved towards gaining what they wanted, it looked like the world was going to fall apart. And so that's one way I kind of brainstorm. But I would just go back to asking the question, what's the worst that could happen? And kind of developing that out, making sure you know where the story is going before you sit down and start writing book one.
Amazing. Angela, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. We've learned so much. I wish we could keep talking. I'm going to drop Angela has a podcast with Stephanie, who you guys heard from yesterday. So you can catch Stephanie and Angela on their podcast. It's indieauthorlifestyle.com, and they talk all things writing. They also, you tell me, but you also talk book marketing and publishing and that type of thing on there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about craft and writing and, digging into world building and being more intentional with diversity. But we also talk about marketing and strategies for getting your book out there and getting visibility for it. And so it's a fun podcast. We're very laid back. It's like sitting down with a cup of coffee and just chatting. So I hope y'all will come across and listen to it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Angela. For everybody else, thank you guys so much for this amazing session, for participating this week. Please feel free to catch us in the Facebook group. I think Stephanie's actually in there right now answering some questions. So if you had any questions for her based on her session yesterday, please feel free to pop in there, and we'll try to get Angela in there as well if she's able to pop in. And then, yeah, join us on the networking session later today. And then remember to upgrade to premium if you're interested in coming to tomorrow's sessions. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Angela. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Bye.